Hey, what's up everybody? It's Izzy from PowerliftingToWin.com, and next up in our queue of programs to review is Korte's 3x3 South Powerlifting Training. Now, there is no ebook or any cost associated with this program. I'm going to go ahead and throw up a link in the description box to the original articles by Korte himself so you guys can check those out. Now, a lot of you guys have been complaining that these videos are getting too long and I'm talking too much. So on this one, we're going to try and blast right through it. So let's get started. Now, in terms of the history and context behind Korte's 3x3, you have to understand that Stefan Korte was a German powerlifting coach in the IPF during the 90s. He coached 2 junior world champions, including a guy who benched over 600 without a bench shirt, and also the first German to ever total more than 1,000 kilos. It's incredibly important to note that Korte himself, as well as his lifters, were single-ply competitors in the IPF. As such, this entire cycle was designed with the geared lifter in mind, not the raw lifter. We'll talk more about that later. Like most Eastern Bloc coaches, Korte was heavily influenced by Olympic weightlifting. Now, it shouldn't come as any surprise then that his program features incredibly high frequency, at least for powerlifting, and virtually no assistance exercises whatsoever. As I said, his program was modeled after weightlifters such as the Bulgarians. And those guys believe that you got to practice your sport to get good at your sport. Now, Korte's 3x3 is a percentage-based program, so I'm going to go ahead and throw up a link to a spreadsheet in the description box for you guys because nobody wants to do all that math. Now, here's how Korte's 3x3 works. Basically, what you're going to do is you're going to take a competition max or maxes that were done with competition conditions. That means your squat suit, your bench shirt, your knee wraps, belt, all gear included. And then you're going to take those competition maxes and you're going to add 25 pounds to the squat, 10 pounds to the bench, and 15 pounds to the deadlift. And then all of the percentages in the program are based off of those new projected maxes at the end. Now, Korte's 3x3 uses a very important thing called the energy saving method, or ESM. And what ESM is unlike, say, West Side Style speed training or compensatory acceleration training, instead of using maximal effort on minimal weights, what you're going to do is you're going to use minimal effort. So you're going to try literally as little as you can in order to complete each rep. And this is a lot like the Bulgarian style of training where you're not going to be doing any psyching up, listening to music, anything like that. You're going to use literally the minimum amount of effort that you can to save as much energy as possible during these incredibly high volume phases. Korte's 3x3 is broken up into 2 phases, phase 1 and phase 2. So let's first look at phase 1. So phase 1 is 4 weeks long. As you can see, you'll perform 5 to 8 sets of 5 on the squat and deadlift and 6 to 8 sets of 6 on the bench press. In week 1, you'll start at 58% of your projected max, and each week you increase the weights by 2%. So 60% week 2, 62% week 3, and 64% in week 4. You perform the exact same workout every single time you lift for the full 4 weeks. The only difference is that 2% from week to week increase. It's important to note that you will not be using any powerlifting gear during this period. The only exception is a belt for squat and wrist wraps for the bench. Phase 2 is only slightly more complicated. Here it is. During phase 2, you'll work up to a heavy single once per week on each lift. Korte suggests hitting the deadlift single on Monday, the bench single on Wednesday, and the squat single on Friday, but you can rearrange that order if you want. In week 1, the single will be 80%, week 2, 85%, week 3, 90%, and in week 4, it'll be 95%. You'll use full gear for all singles, including knee wraps, belt, and squat suits or bench shirts. And again, each week increases by 5%, culminating in 95% on week 4. The rest of your workouts for each lift during phase 2 will feature 3x3 performed at 60% of your projected max. The one exception, as you can see, is bench press, which uses 5x4, but still at 60%. And don't worry guys, I am going to throw up a link to a spreadsheet in the description box so you don't have to calculate all of this yourself. On this program, you're going to do a meet right after you finish phase 2. So here's Korte's suggested peaking plan. So here's the meet peak from Korte's article itself. You can see he was using example numbers, but for our purposes, the only important thing here is the percentages. So you can see Monday is just a typical workout from phase 2 without any singles being performed. Wednesday, however, is a slight deload featuring 3x3s at 50% instead of the normal 60%. From there, you just rest until the competition, which is either going to be a Saturday or a Sunday. Given that this is a high frequency, high volume template, it makes sense to maintain higher volumes and frequencies going into the peak to prevent detraining. In terms of periodization, Korte 3x3 uses block periodization in the strict sense. So in the first 4 weeks, all the training is dedicated to work capacity, hypertrophy, technique, and volume tolerance. You're doing anywhere from 60 to 150 lifts or so at or above 60% of your max. Now, without any transition whatsoever, when you go to phase 2, you cut your volume by about 50 to 100% or so, and you're only doing 20 lifts above or at 60% during the training week. And of course, the phase 2 is completely and explicitly focused on maximal strength and peaking you for competition. Korte 3x3 features 2 incredibly distinct and separate phases. The interesting thing about Korte 3x3 is that it features almost no programmatic variation from week to week and workout to workout. So from workout to workout, during phase 1, you're literally doing the exact same workout 12 times throughout phase 1. There's no changes at all. The only change is that from week to week, you increase the intensity by 2%. There's virtually no programmatic variation within each training week, and there's barely any variation from week to week as well. The main variation, which is of course the most important here, is the variation from mesocycle to mesocycle as you switch from phase 1 to phase 2. Still, I'd prefer to see a more sophisticated programmatic structure here. Most trainees are going to benefit from having variety within the training week. Doing the exact same thing every single training session quickly produces diminishing marginal returns for the intermediate trainee. And if you're a novice, well, this program just doesn't give you an appropriate rate of progression. Even though you're doing the same thing every workout, you're only going for PRs once every 9 weeks, and that's just not enough for the novice. In terms of specificity, Korte 3x3 features no assistance at all. That's right, 0 assistance, literally none. However, in my opinion, going to the extremes of specificity like this is actually not beneficial because of diminishing marginal returns. The more you expose your body to the same stimulus, the less response that you're going to get to that stimulus. So at some point, it makes sense that instead of doing the same thing every single time, you use close variations of the competition movements. Because of the variety and stimulus, even though it's not as specific, you still get more carryover from it than doing the same thing yet another time. So instead of, for example, squatting 5 or 6 times a week, at some point that 4th squatting session, maybe the 3rd squatting session, maybe the 5th squatting session, it's hard to say, you'd rather use a variation because using that variation, since it's a new stimulus, is actually going to provide more of a training effect than doing the same thing yet again. And with Korte 3x3, you're not only doing all the same movements every single time, you're basically doing the same workout every single time as well. Not only that, but in terms of specificity, this program was not designed for the raw lifter. This program was designed for the geared lifter. So keep this in mind. When you're doing all of these weeks at about 60% during phase 1, that's only 60% of their geared max. And really, full competition gear, including today's knee wraps and belts and squat suits, might add anywhere from 10 to 25% to your lifts. So with that in mind, you have to say, well, the geared lifters who are using 60% of their geared max are probably doing more like 70, 75, 80% of their raw max during those phases. However, if you're a raw lifter, well, you're going to be doing 60%. And in my opinion, spending an entire month doing no weights above 70% is just nonsensical. You have to lift heavy to lift heavy. And not only that, but you're not even doing 60% in a hard way. You're doing 60% with as little effort as possible due to the energy saving method. So for raw lifters, on the one hand, it's almost too specific because of the movement selection and the lack of programmatic variety. But on the other hand, the percentages really aren't heavy enough to have a high specificity to powerlifting carryover. In terms of overload, Korte 3x3 just uses progressive overload. The percentages increase from week to week. So due to the fact that the percentages are increasing, you're handling heavier weights. And in addition to the high volumes that you do, that's what's going to drive progress on the program. In my opinion, the fatigue management on Korte's 3x3 is actually pretty poor and really primitive. You have absolutely no variation within the training week. So throughout this program, during the first 12 weeks, all you're doing is accumulating more fatigue each and every single workout. There is no waiving of workload or intensity whatsoever. And from practical experience, we know that the body responds very well to changes in stimulus. Different stimuli are going to produce more effective results in terms of adaptation rather than doing the same thing every single time. So again, I'd rather see fatigue management structures that have variation from workout to workout, week to week, and from period to period. In Korte's 3x3, you'll only have variation from period to period. Additionally, even though there's no assistance on this program whatsoever, I still think that the deadlifting is going to be too challenging for most American lifters who are used to doing like 2 or 3 work sets per week on the deadlift. Remember, the minimum amount of deadlifting that you're doing on Korte 3x3 in phase 1 is 5 sets of 5, 3 times a week. That's the minimum. And you can do up to 8 sets of 5, 3 times a week. So again, if you're used to doing like 10 or 15 deadlift reps, going to 60 to 150 or so is just, wow, that's way too much, and I don't think most people can handle it. As far as individual differences go, it's really the same old story with this program as it is with many of the others that we've looked at. Now, Korte's 3x3 does offer a small range of sets that you can perform, so there is some volume auto-regulation. Like during phase 1, you can do between 5 to 8 sets on the squats and the deadlift, and you can do between 6 to 8 sets on the bench. So depending on how you feel, there is, again, a range there for you to select from. But overall, you're not getting much volume variation out of that, especially because it's only in phase 1. So for the most part, on Korte's 3x3, in terms of individual differences, everybody is doing the exact same thing. There is no personalized movement selection. The workouts are all exactly the same for the most part. There is no intensity auto-regulation. You're given a percentage and you do that percentage regardless of how you feel. And as we've said over and over again, this is simply suboptimal. The older lifter needs less volume than the younger lifter, and even the same lifter is going to perform differently on different days of the week. If your programming doesn't let you take advantage of good days and doesn't allow you to survive bad days by adjusting your workload depending on your performance during that day, well, you've just got a recipe for suboptimal programming. Sometimes you're going to be doing not enough, and other times you're going to be doing too much. And that's exactly what happens on programs that don't have auto-regulation like Korte's 3x3. The coolest thing about Korte's 3x3 to me is that it just goes to show that not everybody buys into the American style of powerlifting, and that you can be a world champion without doing thousands of reps on face pulls, curls, lateral raises, hamstring curls, and leg extensions, and a bunch of other bodybuilding style stuff that some of us really just hate to do. Now, if you like that stuff, it is what it is, but you don't have to do it. And programs like this that have produced world champions without it prove that. That said, I really don't recommend this program for the raw lifter, just for a variety of reasons. 1, there's no auto-regulation. 2, I feel like the percentages during phase 1 are way too light. And the other thing is that it's just too specific. Like, there's no variations and no personalized movement selection whatsoever. If you're interested in doing one of these cookie cutter, high volume, high frequency routines, in my opinion, you're much better off learning and studying the Shaco routines and then adapting one of those to yourself. Better yet, you could actually hire Shaco himself to make you a program because he's available for that service nowadays. So overall, Korte's 3x3 is a really cool program to learn from, but I don't recommend it to raw lifters. Next up, we're going to look at the high frequency, high volume approach of the highly successful Norwegian powerlifting team. Now, I was lucky enough to have one of the PowerliftingToWin community members translate some of the programs and articles for me, so we're going to be able to take a look at some information that might not be out there elsewhere on the internet, and that's pretty cool. So if you're interested in these European style programs, be sure to tune in for that one as well. If you guys found this content interesting, informative, or entertaining, please like, share, and send it out into the interwebs for me. If you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to pop over to the PowerliftingToWin forums and I'll address any issues that you do have personally. If you're interested in customized, personalized powerlifting coaching, including how to incorporate auto-regulation appropriately into your program, shoot me an email at admin@powerliftingtowin.com and we can discuss the PowerliftingToWin coaching services further. Subscribe if you haven't already. And don't forget to check out PowerliftingToWin.com for more great powerlifting information. Have a nice day.